I spent 3 years opening my home, my heart, and my life to my daughter and son in law. Then one morning, a voicemail changed everything. In just 14 seconds, the man living under my roof called me a burden and suggested I should leave my own home. What he did not know was that his message would uncover years of deception, hidden schemes, and a betrayal far deeper than I ever imagined. And before it was over, everything he built would come crashing down. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. My name is Evelyn Parker. I was 66 years old the morning I stood on the front porch of my home and watched a blanket of fog roll slowly across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Asheville, North Carolina, had always been beautiful in the early hours. The mountains seemed softer then, almost protective, as if they were trying to shelter the town from whatever troubles might come with the day. The house behind me had been my home for more than 30 years. Most people in the neighborhood called it Parker House. It sat on a gentle hillside surrounded by flower gardens that bloomed from early spring until late autumn. Every stone path, every rose bush, and every freshly painted window frame carried memories that stretched across decades. My husband, Robert Parker, and I had spent years restoring the old place. Robert had been a respected real estate attorney in Asheville, the kind of man people trusted because his word meant something. He believed old houses deserve second chances. I believed the same thing about people. When Robert died 9 years earlier, many friends suggested I sell the house and move somewhere smaller. They worried the property would become too much for me to manage alone. I understood their concern, but leaving never felt like an option. Selling the house would have felt like losing Robert twice. Instead, I built a new routine around the life I still had. I worked in the gardens. I attended church every Sunday. I volunteered at local community events and spent afternoons visiting neighbors. From the outside, my life probably looked peaceful. In many ways, it was. Still, there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Some evenings, the silence inside Parker House felt heavier than others. My daughter Claire was the brightest part of my life. She was my only child, and I had raised her to be kind, hardworking, and compassionate. Watching her become a nurse had been one of my proudest moments. She cared deeply about people and always tried to see the good in them. That was one reason she fell in love with Trevor Mitchell. When Claire first introduced him to me, I wanted to like him. Truthfully, I did like him. Trevor was confident without seeming arrogant. He knew how to hold a conversation and always appeared genuinely interested in the people around him. He spoke about goals, opportunities, and building a future. Robert had occasionally given me thoughtful looks after Trevor left family dinners, but he never openly criticized him. Several years later, Claire and Trevor welcomed their daughter, Lily. From the moment she was born, Lily captured my heart completely. She had Claire's smile and an endless curiosity about the world. Our weekly visits quickly became the highlight of my life. We baked cookies, planted flowers, and spent hours reading stories together. Those afternoons filled parts of my heart that had remained empty since Robert's passing. As time passed, Trevor became increasingly involved in real estate investments. At first, everything seemed promising. Then several projects failed. One investment became two losses, and two losses became a growing financial problem. I noticed the stress long before anyone spoke about it openly. Then one evening, Claire arrived at my front door unexpectedly. She looked exhausted. Trevor stood beside her, trying to appear optimistic, but worry was written across his face. They explained that money had become tight. They only needed a temporary place to stay while they got back on their feet. A few months, they promised. Nothing more. I looked past them and saw Lily standing quietly near the driveway. Then I thought about the empty bedrooms inside Parker House. Family helps family. That was how I had always lived my life. I welcomed them in without hesitation. Looking back now, that was the moment everything truly began. I simply did not know it yet. When Claire, Trevor, and Lily first moved into Parker House, the change felt like a blessing. For years, the house had been quiet. After Robert passed away, I had grown accustomed to silence. Some days it felt peaceful. Other days, it felt like an empty chair at the dinner table that never stopped reminding me who was missing. Suddenly, there were footsteps in the hallway again. There was laughter drifting from the kitchen. There were family dinners, school projects spread across the dining room table, and a little girl who ran through the house as if every room held a new adventure. Lily brought life back into Parker House. The original plan had been simple. Claire and Trevor would stay for a few months while they recovered from their financial difficulties. Once things stabilized, they would find a place of their own and move forward. I never asked for rent. I paid the utility bills, bought most of the groceries, and covered many household expenses without giving it much thought. Family was more important than money. At least that was what I told myself. Trevor often reassured me that things were improving. New opportunities were always right around the corner. Better investments were always about to succeed. The difficult season was supposedly temporary. Months passed, then a year. Before I realized it, more than 2 years had slipped away. Claire worked long shifts at the hospital. I helped with Lily whenever I could. School pickups became part of my routine. So did preparing meals, helping with homework, and watching her during weekends when Claire needed extra rest. In many ways, I became a second parent. I did not resent it. The happiest moments of my week were spent with Lily. We planted flowers together in the garden behind the house. We baked cookies that never looked as neat as the recipes promised. We read stories before bedtime while she asked endless questions about everything from butterflies to the moon. Those moments made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. That was probably why I ignored the warning signs. At first, they were small. Trevor stopped referring to Parker House as my home. Instead, he called it the house. Then it became our place. Eventually, it became the family home. The changes were subtle enough that I almost convinced myself they meant nothing. One afternoon, I returned from a church event and discovered the garage completely reorganized. Boxes had been moved. Gardening tools had been relocated. Several pieces of Robert's old furniture had been stacked against a wall. Nothing was damaged, but everything was different. Trevor proudly explained how much more efficient the space had become. I thanked him. Then I spent the evening feeling strangely unsettled. The garage had never belonged to Trevor, yet he had acted as though it did. Around the same time, Claire began changing too. She seemed exhausted almost all the time. Conversations that once lasted hours became brief exchanges between responsibilities. Whenever tension appeared between Trevor and me, she usually sided with him or avoided the discussion entirely. I blamed stress. It was easier than considering other possibilities. Trevor's confidence continued growing. He frequently discussed renovations, landscaping changes, and upgrades that sounded permanent. He spoke about future plans as if his long-term residence had already been decided. One evening, he suggested donating an antique cabinet that had belonged to Robert. He claimed it made the house feel outdated. I politely refused. For the first time, I saw irritation flash across his face. A few weeks later, something else happened. Several important pieces of mail never arrived. I was expecting property tax documents and correspondence from my bank. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing appeared. I assumed there had been a delay somewhere in the postal system. Still, a quiet feeling of unease settled in my stomach. One evening, I stood alone in Robert's old study and looked around the room. That was when I realized something troubling. Without noticing it, I had started asking permission before making decisions inside my own house. The thought lingered long after the lights were turned off. For the first time, I wondered whether the arrangement I had welcomed so willingly was becoming something very different from what I had agreed to. The message arrived on a Monday morning that began like dozens of others before it. The air over Asheville was cool and fresh. A light mist drifted across the hills beyond my garden while I watered the roses that lined the stone pathway leading to the front porch. Claire had already left for work at the hospital. Lily was at school. Trevor had mentioned a meeting with a client somewhere downtown. For the first time in days, Parker House felt quiet. I welcomed the silence. After finishing in the garden, I carried a cup of coffee into the kitchen and noticed a voicemail notification on my phone. I assumed it was Claire calling during a break. She occasionally left messages when our schedules did not line up. Without thinking much about it, I pressed play. Trevor's voice filled the room. At first, I thought I had misunderstood what I was hearing. Then I listened again and again. The message lasted only 14 seconds. 14 seconds that changed everything. Trevor explained that I was becoming a burden. He suggested the house would function better if I lived somewhere else. A senior living community, he implied, would be more appropriate for someone my age. The words themselves were painful enough, but one sentence struck harder than the rest. He claimed Claire agreed. There was no gratitude in his voice, no respect, no acknowledgement of the years I had spent supporting them, no recognition of the fact that they were living in a home I had opened to them out of love. Only dismissal. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. For several minutes, I could not move. The strange thing was that I did not cry. I expected anger. I expected heartbreak. Instead, I felt something colder, clarity. As the shock settled, memories began surfacing one after another. The garage Trevor had reorganized without permission. The antique cabinet he wanted removed because it reminded him of the past. The renovation plans he discussed as though the property belonged to him. The gradual shift from calling it my home to calling it the family home. Even Claire's growing distance suddenly looked different. Individually, each event had seemed small. Together, they formed a pattern. For 3 years, I had been explaining away warning signs because I wanted peace. Now I understood something I had refused to see. Trevor did not view me as family. He viewed me as an obstacle, and Parker House was the prize sitting behind that obstacle. I finished my coffee without tasting it and walked slowly to Robert's old study. The room had changed very little since his death. Shelves of legal books still lined the walls. His favorite leather chair remained near the window overlooking the gardens. A framed photograph of us during our 30th wedding anniversary stood on the desk. I picked it up and stared at his familiar smile. Robert had spent his career solving disputes that other people allowed to become disasters. He always believed important decisions should be made calmly, never emotionally. That lesson returned to me with surprising force. I opened a desk drawer and searched through several folders. Near the back, I found an old business card. Michael Lawson, Robert's longtime legal partner. I had not spoken to Michael in years. Yet at that moment, his name felt like the first solid ground beneath my feet. I saved Trevor's voicemail instead of deleting it. Then I created a separate folder on my phone. I named it simply Keep. After that, I placed the phone beside me and called Michael Lawson's office. Before the day ended, an appointment was scheduled. Looking back now, Trevor believed those 14 seconds would help push me out of my own home. He never imagined they would become the first piece of evidence that helped me take it back. 2 days after receiving Trevor's voicemail, I drove into downtown Asheville to meet Michael Lawson. The drive felt longer than usual. Every traffic light seemed to give me more time to think about those 14 seconds and the uncomfortable clarity they had left behind. By the time I parked outside Michael's office, I had replayed the message so many times that I could practically recite it from memory. The building itself brought back memories. For nearly 3 decades, Robert had walked through those same doors. Michael had been his legal partner, his closest professional friend, and one of the few people whose judgment Robert trusted completely. Walking into the office felt strangely familiar and painful at the same time. Michael greeted me warmly, but the expression on his face changed the moment I explained why I was there. We sat down in his office, and I played the voicemail. He listened carefully without interrupting. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he sighed. The message clearly disturbed him. Still, he explained something important. Cruelty was not necessarily illegal. Disrespect was not necessarily illegal. Even trying to pressure someone emotionally was not always illegal. If we were going to protect me, we needed facts. We needed documentation. We needed evidence. That afternoon became the beginning of a detailed review of nearly every important record connected to my life. Property records, tax statements, insurance files, bank correspondence, utility accounts, investment records. I gathered everything I could find and delivered copies to Michael over the following days. Fortunately, Robert had always believed in organization. His habits had become mine. Most documents were neatly stored and easy to locate. Michael complimented the system more than once. Then something unusual appeared. Several expected documents were missing. Property tax notices that should have arrived months earlier were nowhere to be found. Certain banking communications were absent. Credit monitoring letters were also missing. At first, neither of us thought much of it. Mail occasionally gets lost. Mistakes happen. But as we continued reviewing records, the pattern became harder to ignore. The missing items all involved financial information. Nothing personal. Nothing random. Only documents connected to money, property, or credit. Michael asked a question that immediately made me uncomfortable. Had anyone else regularly collected the mail? The answer came to me faster than I wanted. Trevor. Many afternoons he reached the mailbox before anyone else. Until that moment, I had never viewed that behavior as suspicious. Now it felt different. Michael suggested contacting the post office and several financial institutions. Over the next week, I made dozens of phone calls. What I learned unsettled me deeply. Several organizations confirmed that important notices had been mailed exactly as scheduled. According to their records, everything had been delivered. Yet I had never seen any of it. Then the real answer arrived. A supervisor with the United States Postal Service contacted us after conducting an internal review. A mail forwarding request had been submitted using my personal information. The request redirected specific categories of correspondence: bank notices, credit-related documents, tax communications. All of them had been routed away from Parker House. I had never authorized any such request. When I heard those words, I felt physically ill. The problem was no longer simple family conflict. Someone had deliberately interfered with my mail. Someone inside my life had taken active steps to prevent me from receiving important financial information. Michael's reaction was immediate. He explained that mail fraud was an extremely serious matter. More importantly, people rarely hide financial correspondence without a reason. In his experience, missing mail often point toward a larger problem waiting beneath the surface. That evening, I returned home exhausted. Trevor was sitting comfortably in the living room watching television. He looked completely relaxed, completely normal. For the first time, I found myself studying him differently. Not as my son-in-law, not even as family, as someone I might need to investigate. Later that night, I sat alone in Robert's study. The house was quiet. The voicemail suddenly seemed much smaller than it had a few days earlier. I finally understood something important. Those 14 seconds had not started the story. They were simply the first mistake Trevor had made. The real story had begun long before that message ever arrived. A week after we uncovered the mail forwarding scheme, Michael Lawson and I were still reviewing financial records. What had started as an investigation into a cruel voicemail had become something much larger. Every new discovery seemed to reveal another layer beneath the one before it. The deeper we looked, the less I recognized the life I thought I had been living. By then, I was exhausted. I still watered the gardens each morning. I still baked cookies with Lily when she came home from school. I still attended church on Sundays. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. Inside, however, I felt as though I were standing on unstable ground. Michael believed the missing mail was connected to a larger financial issue. He asked the bank for additional records involving Parker House and every account associated with the property. A few days later, he noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar account reference number appeared in a set of banking documents. At first, it seemed insignificant. Neither of us recognized it. Michael requested additional records while I assumed it was probably some administrative mistake that would eventually be explained. Instead, the explanation changed everything. 3 days later, Michael called me. His voice was calm, but there was a seriousness beneath it that immediately made my stomach tighten. He asked me to come to his office. Nothing more. The moment I arrived, I knew the news was bad. Several documents were spread across his desk. Michael pointed to one of them. The paperwork showed an active home equity line of credit secured against Parker House. For a moment, I simply stared at the page. The balance was approximately $220,000. My home had been listed as collateral. The account had been active for months. I felt completely numb. There was only one problem. I had never opened such an account. I had never requested one. I had never authorized borrowing a single dollar against my house. When I told Michael exactly that, he nodded immediately. He already suspected the same thing. Together, we reviewed every page. At first glance, everything appeared legitimate. There was electronic authorization, identity verification, supporting documentation. The records looked convincing enough to satisfy a lender. Then Michael found the detail that changed the entire picture. The authorization relied on an older electronic signature. The digital credentials originated from documents I had signed years earlier. Someone had reused archived information. Someone familiar with my records. Someone who knew where to find them. A cold feeling spread through me. I thought about the missing mail, the documents Trevor frequently handled, the household files stored inside Parker House, the computer he occasionally used. For the first time, all the pieces began fitting together. Michael explained the danger carefully. If the loan went into default, the lender could pursue the property itself. Parker House was no longer just a home under emotional attack. It was a financial target. When the meeting ended, I sat alone in my car for nearly an hour. I remembered restoring the old house with Robert. I remembered raising Claire within those walls. I remembered Lily running through the gardens chasing butterflies on summer afternoons. Every important chapter of my life lived inside that house. The realization hit me with devastating force. Trevor was never trying to push me out simply because I was inconvenient. He was trying to remove the final obstacle standing between himself and everything I owned. That evening, I walked slowly through every room of Parker House. I touched photographs, furniture, and door frames polished by decades of family memories. Standing inside Robert's study, I made a silent promise. No matter how difficult the fight became, I would not allow this house to be stolen. Not from me, not from the family history built within its walls. I barely slept the night after learning about the fraudulent home equity line of credit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Parker House sitting at the center of a web of paperwork I had never approved. The thought that my home could have been used as collateral without my knowledge felt unreal. Yet the documents on Michael Lawson's desk had been very real. Just before sunrise, I walked through the gardens behind the house. The roses were beginning to bloom. A soft breeze moved through the trees lining the property. For weeks, I'd been carrying fear everywhere I went. That morning, something changed. The fear was still there, but determination had finally become stronger. I understood that I had only two options. I could do nothing and hope the situation somehow corrected itself, or I could protect the life Robert and I had spent decades building. I chose the second option. Later that morning, I met Michael at his office. He had already prepared a strategy. The first priority was preventing additional damage. Within hours, we placed fraud alerts on my accounts. Credit freezes were submitted to the major credit bureaus. Identity theft notifications were filed. Every step created another barrier against anyone attempting to borrow money using my information. Michael explained that speed mattered now. The longer we waited, the greater the risk. We also began organizing evidence: bank records, property records, mail forwarding documents, electronic authorization records, correspondence from financial institutions. Everything was carefully collected and stored. Michael insisted that documentation would determine the outcome of the case. Feelings would not. Assumptions would not. Evidence would. The advice reminded me of Robert. Throughout his legal career, he had often said that facts survive arguments, while emotions rarely do. For the first time since the voicemail arrived, I felt as though I was following a clear path. The difficult part came when I returned home. Trevor was sitting in the living room watching television. He looked relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware of the investigation unfolding around him. At one point, I watched him laugh with Lily while helping her assemble a school project. The scene looked so ordinary that it almost made me question everything. Almost. Then I remembered the missing mail, the fraudulent loan, the voicemail. The question disappeared. Maintaining my composure became its own challenge. I could not confront him. Not yet. Michael had been very clear about that. The investigation needed time. Evidence needed protection. Every careless conversation created risk. Meanwhile, I found myself paying closer attention to Claire. She seemed exhausted. More than once, I caught her staring into space after work, as though she were carrying burdens she could not discuss. I wondered whether she knew anything about what Trevor had done. Was she involved, or had she been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had? I refused to guess. Without proof, assumptions were dangerous. A few days later, Michael reviewed the ownership records for Parker House. The results were straightforward. The property remained entirely in my name. No ownership rights belonged to Trevor. No rental agreement existed. No legal arrangement gave him any claim to the home. That afternoon, Michael began drafting the documents necessary to start removing Trevor and Claire from the property. Before leaving his office, I signed the authorization he needed to proceed. Inside one of the legal folders, I found an old handwritten note from Robert discussing the importance of protecting what matters most. The timing felt almost impossible, as if his voice had somehow reached across the years. That night, I stood at my bedroom window looking out over Parker House. Trevor believed I would quietly surrender. He believed I was powerless. He believed I would leave. He was wrong about all three. For 3 years, I had opened doors for Trevor Mitchell. Now, for the first time, I was preparing to close one. A week after I authorized Michael Lawson to move forward, the legal paperwork was finally ready. By then, every document had been organized. Fraud alerts were active. Credit freezes were in place. The evidence file continued growing thicker with each passing DT. Michael assured me that we had done everything correctly. Even so, I felt nervous. Once the notice was delivered, there would be no returning to the life we had been living. The morning arrived quietly. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor while I drank coffee and watched the birds outside the garden window. Trevor was upstairs. Lily had already left for school. Claire was working another long shift at the hospital. Just after 10 o'clock, a vehicle pulled into the driveway. A professional process server stepped out carrying a folder. I knew exactly why he was there. Trevor did not. A few moments later, I heard the front door open, then silence. The kind of silence that signals something important has happened. When Trevor entered the kitchen, his face looked completely different from the confident expression I had grown accustomed to seeing. The documents were still in his hand. For several seconds, he simply stared at me. Then anger arrived. His voice rose. Questions poured out rapidly. Accusations followed. He insisted there had been some kind of misunderstanding. He suggested I was making a terrible mistake. He claimed the situation had been exaggerated. Months earlier, I might have defended myself. I might have explained. I might have argued. Instead, I remained calm. Michael had prepared me for this moment. The only response I offered was that future communication regarding the matter should be directed through legal counsel. Nothing more. The reaction only made Trevor angrier. For the rest of the day, he paced through the house making phone calls. Doors opened and closed. Frustrated footsteps echoed through the hallways that had once felt peaceful. I spent most of the afternoon in the garden. The flowers needed attention, and working with my hands helped steady my thoughts. When Claire returned home that evening, everything changed again. The notice was waiting for her. Shock spread across her face as she read it. Confusion quickly followed. I could see how desperately she was trying to understand what had happened. Trevor immediately presented himself as the victim. According to his version of events, I was overreacting. I was destroying the family. I was creating problems where none existed. Claire looked torn between the two people she trusted most. Watching her struggle hurt more than I expected. No matter what had happened, she was still my daughter. I loved her. I worried about Lily. Part of me wanted to make the entire conflict disappear, but another part understood a difficult truth. Backing down would not save the family. It would only protect the deception that was already damaging it. Over the next several days, Trevor's confidence began to crack. He spent hours searching for legal solutions. He contacted attorneys. He made endless calls. The more answers he received, the more frustrated he became. At the same time, financial complications started appearing. Certain accounts became restricted. Questions were raised by lenders. Requests for clarification arrived. Systems that had once worked in Trevor's favor suddenly became obstacles. Claire noticed the changes. More importantly, she began noticing inconsistencies. His explanations shifted from one day to the next. Small details stopped matching. Answers became vague whenever she asked direct questions. For the first time, doubt appeared in her eyes. One afternoon, I watched Lily playing among the rose bushes behind the house. That simple moment gave me clarity. I was not fighting against my family. I was fighting to protect what remained of it. Late one evening, I heard Trevor pacing downstairs long after everyone else had gone to bed. For years, I had carried the anxiety. Now, the burden had finally shifted. Trevor had spent years treating Parker House like it belonged to him. The notice resting on the kitchen counter was the first document that reminded him it never had. 2 weeks after the notice was served, Parker House felt different. The tension had settled into every room like a heavy fog. Meals were quiet. Conversations were brief. Even the ordinary sounds of daily life seemed muted beneath the pressure that now surrounded all of us. Trevor spent most of his time making phone calls. Some were with attorneys. Others appeared to involve lenders or business associates. Whatever confidence he once carried had begun to fade. Claire noticed it too. I could see the change happening slowly. For years, she had trusted Trevor's explanations without question. Now she was beginning to ask questions of her own. At first, she wanted simple answers. She wanted to understand the eviction notice. She wanted to understand why the mail had been redirected without my knowledge. She wanted to understand why financial investigations were suddenly appearing around their family. The answers Trevor provided never seemed consistent. One day he blamed misunderstandings. The next day he blamed paperwork errors. Later, he suggested that people were exaggerating routine business issues. Each explanation sounded different from the one before. Claire listened carefully. For the first time, she stopped accepting everything at face value. Meanwhile, Michael Lawson continued gathering records. The evidence surrounding the mail forwarding request had become stronger. The home equity line of credit investigation continued expanding. Every new document pointed toward the same conclusion. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Trevor seemed to sense that control was slipping away. His patience grew shorter. His temper appeared more often. Small frustrations triggered larger reactions. The image he had carefully maintained for years was beginning to crack. Then Claire found something she was never supposed to see. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork in a spare bedroom, she discovered a folder hidden behind several storage boxes. Inside were financial documents she had never seen before. Credit statements, debt records, past due notices, evidence of obligations far larger than anything Trevor had ever admitted. She spent hours reviewing the paperwork alone. When she emerged later that evening, something had changed in her expression. The uncertainty remained, but now it was accompanied by realization. For the first time, she understood how much information had been kept from her. Watching this unfold was difficult. Part of me wanted to tell her everything. Part of me wanted to hand her every document Michael had collected. But I remembered something important. People trapped inside manipulation rarely escape because someone lectures them. They escape because they finally see the truth themselves. So I waited. A few days later, Claire and I shared a quiet moment in the garden while Lily played nearby. Neither of us said much. We did not need to. The sadness in Claire's eyes told me more than words could have. I offered support without demanding explanations. She seemed grateful for that. For the first time in months, I felt a small measure of hope. Then Michael called. While reviewing old Parker family legal records connected to Robert's estate, he had discovered something unexpected, something important, a document Trevor never knew existed. After ending the call, I sat alone on the porch and watched the sun sink behind the mountains. Claire was finally beginning to see reality. Trevor's carefully constructed foundation was weakening, And somewhere inside Robert's old legal files, another revelation was waiting. Trevor had spent years building his future on secrets. The problem with secrets is that eventually they begin finding daylight. If you're still watching and eager to see whether the truth will finally bring everything crashing down, comment number 8 below to let me know you're with me. The final secrets are about to be revealed. Old protections are about to come to light, and we are heading straight toward the conclusion of this story. Now, let's move on to the ending. The morning after Michael Lawson called me, I drove to his office carrying equal parts anxiety and hope. For months, every new discovery had revealed another problem. I expected more bad news. Instead, Michael greeted me with several old legal files spread across his conference table and an expression I had not seen in a long time. Optimism. Many of the documents belonged to Robert's estate planning records. Some had not been reviewed in years. As Michael carefully explained what he had found, memories came rushing back. Years before Robert died, he occasionally mentioned updating legal protections for our family. I remembered hearing those conversations without paying much attention. At the time, I trusted him completely and assumed everything was handled. I had no idea how important those decisions would become. Hidden within the estate records was a trust structure called the Family Protection Trust. Robert had created it specifically to protect me. The trust contained provisions designed to respond if signs of elder financial abuse ever appeared around my primary assets. Under certain circumstances, additional protections could be activated. Transactions could be challenged. Emergency safeguards could be implemented. Most importantly, Parker House was specifically covered. As Michael explained the details, I felt overwhelmed. Even after all these years, Robert had found a way to protect me. I looked down at the paperwork and thought about the countless evenings we had spent restoring the house together. I thought about his careful nature, his attention to detail, and the quiet way he always planned for the future. For a moment, grief and gratitude existed side by side. The discovery dramatically strengthened my legal position. More importantly, Trevor had never known the trust existed. While my situation improved, his continued getting worse. The investigations surrounding the mail forwarding fraud and the unauthorized home equity line of credit were expanding. Lenders were reviewing questionable activity. Additional scrutiny was being applied to financial records connected to him. The options available to Trevor were disappearing one by one. Claire finally reached her own conclusion. After reviewing hidden debts, financial records, and the growing evidence surrounding Trevor's actions, she could no longer ignore reality. The pattern was too clear. The lies, the secrecy, the manipulation, everything pointed in the same direction. Not long afterward, she made the difficult decision to separate herself from him. The marriage that once seemed stable finally reached its breaking point. Later, Claire and I spent time walking through Parker House together. We paused beside family photographs that had witnessed decades of our lives. Neither of us spoke much. Words were not necessary. For the first time in years, we felt like mother and daughter again. The healing was not complete, but it had finally begun. When I left Michael's office carrying copies of the trust documents, the future looked different than it had only weeks earlier. Safer, brighter, more hopeful. Trevor had spent years trying to build a future from what belonged to someone else. Robert had spent years making sure that future would never survive. 1 year later, I stood on the front porch of a Parker house and watched the sunrise spread across the Blue Ridge Mountains. The peace felt different now. The previous year had been filled with investigations, legal documents, painful discoveries, and difficult decisions. Yet standing there that morning, it all felt farther away than I ever thought possible. Trevor's legal and financial troubles continued long after he left Parker House. Lenders pursued recovery efforts, and the consequences of his choices followed him wherever he went. I did not celebrate his downfall. I simply accepted it. Every person eventually lives with the results of their own decisions. Claire rebuilt her life slowly. She found stable full-time work, repaired her finances, and created a comfortable home for herself and Lily. The exhaustion that had followed her for years gradually disappeared. In its place, I saw confidence returning. Watching her rebuild honestly made me proud. Lily continued spending weekends with me. We planted flowers, worked on small projects, and carried on traditions that had become important to both of us. Her laughter once again filled Parker House. The house itself felt restored. Robert's belongings sat where they belonged. Family photographs had returned to their places. The gardens were thriving. For the first time in years, the house truly felt like mine again. One afternoon, I discovered Trevor's old voicemail still saved on my phone. I listened to it one final time. The words that once hurt so deeply no longer had power over me. When it ended, I deleted the message. Not because I had forgotten, because I no longer needed it. A few days later, Claire and Lily visited for Sunday lunch. 3 generations sat together on the back porch, sharing food and laughter beneath the afternoon sun. As I watched them, I thought about everything I had learned. Family should never require self-destruction. Kindness should never require surrendering dignity. Boundaries do not destroy relationships. They protect them. As evening settled over the mountains, I sat quietly on the porch surrounded by blooming flowers and memories of Robert. I spent years believing that protecting my family meant giving away pieces of myself. What I finally learned was that the strongest foundations are built not on sacrifice alone, but on respect. And for the first time in a very long time, both were finally home again. Life has a way of teaching its most important lessons through the moments we never expected to face. Sometimes we hold on too long, believing that love means endless sacrifice, that kindness requires silence, or that keeping the peace is worth losing ourselves. Yet true strength often begins the moment we decide that our dignity matters too. The people who value us will respect our boundaries. The people who only value what we can give may not. In the end, self-respect is not selfish, and protecting what matters most is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of wisdom. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your life, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more inspiring journeys. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.